The doors to St. Mary's Church stayed bolted shut as Kenzie gripped Lexi's trembling hand so tightly their knuckles turned white. Their matching white gowns whipped in the sharp Oregon wind while every resident of Pinewood lined the sidewalks staring straight past them in stony silence. This town won't stand for it, the mayor had announced that morning through a crackling megaphone. And now the boycott was official. No venue, no vendors, no support from anyone who once called them neighbors. Kenzie's chest burned with the kind of rage that made her want to scream. But she swallowed it down because Lexi was already fighting tears. 3 years ago they had met at the county health fair. Kenzie the new pediatrician fresh from Portland. Lexi the environmental engineer at the mill who could quote every safety regulation by heart. Their first date had been coffee in the back booth of the only diner that didn't care who sat together. Love had grown quietly, fiercely, until the day Lexi dropped to one knee in their little backyard and asked Kenzie to marry her right there under the maple tree. They had known Pinewood was conservative. They had heard the whispers at the grocery store. But they never expected the florist to cancel the day after the invitations went out, or the caterer to claim a sudden double booking, or the photographer, who had shot Lexi's sister's wedding, to say she was unavailable. By the end of the week every business in town had found a reason to back away. Kenzie's own mother had called crying, begging her to reconsider for the family's sake, while Lexi's father had simply stopped answering her texts altogether. Still they had pushed forward, printing new invitations on their home printer, planning a small ceremony in the park if the church refused. "We don't need their approval," Lexi had whispered the night before, curled against Kenzie on the couch. But now, standing here on what should have been their wedding day, with the entire town literally turning its back, Kenzie wondered if love alone was enough armor against this kind of hate. The first reporter arrived before noon. A local news van from Eugene with a cameraman who kept his lens trained on their faces like they were criminals. "Dr. Harper, Ms. Rivera. Do you have any comment on the mayor's statement?" Kenzie opened her mouth but Lexi squeezed her hand harder. "We just want to get married in peace," Lexi said, voice steady even though her eyes were glassy. The reporter nodded like she understood. But the camera kept rolling, and Kenzie knew the clip would be online by evening. By the time they walked back to their car, the crowd had thinned, but the damage was done. Kenzie's phone buzzed non-stop. Messages from colleagues at the clinic saying parents were pulling their kids from her pediatric hours. Parents who had smiled at her just last month. Lexi's boss at the mill had left a voicemail. "We need to talk about your role in the upcoming safety audit. Things are delicate right now." Delicate. That single word tasted like poison. They drove home in silence, the radio off, windows up against the chill. Inside their modest two-bedroom house on Maple Lane, Lexi finally let the tears fall. "I can't believe they did this to us," she whispered. Kenzie pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo. But her mind was already racing ahead. How much more could they lose? Their jobs? Their home? Their sanity? The boycott wasn't just about a wedding anymore. It was about erasing them from the only town they had ever called home. That night, as they lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Kenzie made a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. "We'll fight this," she said. "Together." Lexi nodded, but in the dark Kenzie heard the doubt in her silence. Outside, the wind howled like it knew exactly how fragile their future had become. The next morning the local paper ran the headline on page 1. "Pinewood rejects same-sex ceremony, community stands united." Kenzie read it at the kitchen table while Lexi poured coffee neither of them really wanted. The article quoted half the town council, the pastor, even the high school principal who had once praised Kenzie's volunteer work at the health clinic. "We have values here," the principal said. "Family values." The words felt like a slap. Kenzie's phone rang, her supervisor at the clinic. "I'm sorry, Kenzie, but we're getting calls. Parents don't feel comfortable. We're putting you on administrative leave until things calm down." Administrative leave. Code for fired without saying it. She hung up and stared at the screen until it blurred. Lexi's news was worse. The mill had reassigned her to desk duty, citing conflict of interest with the upcoming environmental compliance report she had been leading. The same report that had flagged safety issues months ago. Issues the management had brushed off. They spent the day fielding calls from distant relatives who suddenly wanted to check in, from old friends who offered awkward support mixed with advice to maybe just move to Portland. Kenzie's mother showed up unannounced with a casserole in tears. "Honey, think about your career. Think about children. You'll never adopt here now." Lexi's father texted once. "This is what happens when you push." The words cut deeper than any protest sign. By evening, the national news had picked up the story. A cable channel ran a segment titled "Small Town Stand Against Modern Marriage," complete with footage of them outside the church. Comments flooded in, some supportive, most vicious. Kenzie shut the laptop before Lexi could read the worst ones, but the damage was already in her eyes. They tried to plan a new wedding date anyway. A justice of the peace 2 towns over said yes, but the venue he suggested was booked through next year. Every backup plan crumbled under the weight of canceled deposits and whispered threats. "Maybe we should just elope," Lexi suggested one night, voice small. Kenzie wanted to agree, wanted to pack the car and drive until Pinewood was a speck in the rearview. But something stubborn inside her refused. "Running away tells them they won," she said. "We live here. We work here. We love here." The argument that followed was their first real fight since the boycott began. Lexi accused Kenzie of being naive. Kenzie accused Lexi of giving up too easily. They went to bed angry, backs turned, the space between them feeling wider than the entire town. In the quiet hours, Kenzie wondered if the pressure was already doing what the crowd could not, breaking them apart from the inside. The following week brought more cancellations. Their joint bank account took a hit from lost wedding payments. Lexi's mother called crying, begging her daughter to come home to California and leave that backward place. Kenzie's brother sent a single text. "Proud of you both. Stay strong." It was the only bright spot in days that felt increasingly dark. Then, late on a Thursday night, Lexi came home from the mill with a folder clutched under her arm. "I found something," she said, voice low. "Emails from last year. Management knew about the cracked pipes in Sector 3. They ignored my warnings because, well, you can guess why." Kenzie read the printed chains and felt ice slide down her spine. Those pipes fed the entire chemical processing line. One spark, one pressure surge, and the whole mill could go up. "You have to report this," Kenzie whispered. Lexi shook her head. "If I do now, after the boycott, they'll say I'm just bitter. They'll destroy me." The folder sat on the kitchen counter like a live grenade. Outside, rain began to fall, drumming against the windows as if the sky itself understood the storm that was coming. Monday morning, the mill siren screamed across Pinewood at 9:17 a.m. Kenzie was in the clinic parking lot when her phone exploded with alerts. Explosion at Riverbend Mill, multiple injuries. She didn't think. She just ran for her car, white coat flapping, heart hammering against her ribs. By the time she reached the site, smoke billowed black and thick. Ambulances were already loading victims, but the hospital 20 miles away was overwhelmed. The local clinic was the only option. The mill owner, Mr. Harlan, the same man who had publicly supported the boycott, stood shouting orders. When he saw Kenzie, his face twisted. "We don't need you here," he snapped. But then a child's scream cut through the chaos. 8-year-old Tommy Greer, son of the town librarian, burned and struggling to breathe. Kenzie pushed past Harlan without a word, dropping to her knees beside the boy. "I'm a doctor," she said to the paramedics. "Let me help." They did. For the next 6 hours, Kenzie worked without stopping, treating burns, stabilizing fractures, intubating where she could. Lexi arrived covered in soot, her hard hat askew. "The pipes," she kept repeating. "I told them." But no one was listening yet. The media vans returned, cameras rolling as victims were carried past the same protesters who had lined the church steps days earlier. Now those faces looked terrified instead of righteous. By nightfall, 17 people were hospitalized, 3 in critical condition, 2 still missing. The town hall opened as an emergency shelter. Kenzie finally sat down on a folding chair, hands shaking from adrenaline and exhaustion. Lexi found her there, pressed a bottle of water into her hands. "You saved lives today," she whispered. Kenzie looked up at her, eyes raw. "And tomorrow they'll probably fire me again." The next morning, the county sheriff arrived at their door with a request, not an order. "Dr. Harper, we need you at the clinic full-time. The kids, they're asking for you specifically." Kenzie almost laughed. "The same clinic that put me on leave?" The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "Things are different now." "Different?" The word hung between them like smoke from the mill. Lexi's folder of emails had become evidence. The state environmental agency wanted her statement. If she gave it, the mill could face massive fines, maybe closure. Jobs, hundreds of them, would vanish. Pinewood would collapse. But if she stayed silent, more people could die the next time something broke. "They're begging me to testify," Lexi told Kenzie that night, voice cracking. "The same people who turned their backs on our wedding." Kenzie took her hands. "We have to do what's right." Lexi pulled away. "Right for who? For the town that hates us, or for us? If I testify, they'll twist it, say I caused the explosion out of spite. Our lives will be hell again." The argument stretched into the early hours, voices rising then falling into exhausted whispers. In the end they fell asleep tangled together, but the distance between their hearts felt wider than ever. The hospital corridors smelled of antiseptic and fear. Kenzie moved between beds checking charts, adjusting IVs, murmuring comfort to terrified parents. Little Tommy Greer grabbed her sleeve when she passed. "Dr. Kenzie, are you still mad at us?" The question broke something inside her. She smiled anyway. "No, sweetheart. I'm right here." Outside, protest signs had changed. Instead of "No Gay Wedding," they read "Save Our Jobs" and "Don't Close the Mill." The irony burned. Lexi spent her days in closed-door meetings with investigators, her face drawn and pale when she came home. "They want me to bury the emails," she confessed one evening. "Harlan offered me my old job back, plus a raise, if I say the warnings were never sent." Kenzie stared at her. "You can't." Lexi's laugh was bitter. "Easy for you to say. Your family still talks to you. Mine won't even answer the phone." Media trucks camped outside their house again. Reporters shouted questions about the lesbian couple at the center of the scandal. One tabloid ran a photo of them from the church day with the caption "Heroines or Homewreckers?" Kenzie stopped reading the comments after the first death threats appeared. Then came the call that changed everything. The county prosecutor needed Lexi's testimony for a criminal negligence case against Harlan. If she refused, the case collapsed and the mill would reopen under the same dangerous management. If she agreed, the town would lose its biggest employer overnight. "They're begging us," the prosecutor said on speakerphone. "The whole town council is waiting outside my office right now." Kenzie watched Lexi's face go through every emotion. Anger, fear, exhaustion, love. "Tell them I'll think about it," Lexi finally said. That night they sat on the porch swing, wrapped in one blanket against the cold. "If I testify, we might have to leave Pinewood anyway," Lexi said quietly. "The hate will come back stronger." Kenzie rested her head on Lexi's shoulder. "And if you don't, more kids could get hurt. I can't live with that." The silence stretched. For the first time, Kenzie felt the real weight of their choices. Protect their peace or protect the town that had tried to erase them. Lexi's mother called at midnight, first time in weeks. "Baby, don't do this. Come home. Let them clean up their own mess." Kenzie's mother called 5 minutes later. "Those children need you both. Don't turn your back now." Two mothers, two opposite pleas, and Kenzie and Lexi caught in the middle. The courthouse steps were packed when Lexi walked up the next morning, Kenzie at her side holding her hand in full view of the cameras. Inside, the room was silent as Lexi opened the folder and began reading every email, every ignored warning, every time management had dismissed her concerns with jokes about woke engineers. Harlan sat at the defense table, face gray. By the time she finished, half the gallery was crying. The verdict came faster than anyone expected. Negligence proven. The mill would face millions in fines and likely shut down for upgrades. Jobs were saved only because the state promised emergency funding, if the town accepted help from the very women it had shunned. The mayor stood outside the courthouse afterward, microphone shaking in his hand. "We were wrong," he said, voice breaking. "We need Kenzie and Lexi. We need their forgiveness. We need them to stay." The words should have felt like victory. Instead they felt hollow. That night their house filled with flowers. Anonymous deliveries from neighbors who had crossed the street to avoid them weeks earlier. Cards read, "Thank you," and "We're sorry." Kenzie stacked them on the table until the pile toppled. Lexi watched from the doorway, arms crossed. "They only want us now because we're useful," she said. "What happens when the cameras leave?" Kenzie had no answer. The arguments returned, sharper this time. Lexi wanted to sell the house and move. Kenzie wanted to stay and rebuild. If we run now, we teach them that hate wins, she argued. If we stay, we show them love is stronger. Lexi's eyes filled. I'm tired of being the lesson, Kenzie. I just want to be your wife. They cried together on the living room floor until exhaustion won. In the quiet afterward, Kenzie realized the real crisis had never been the boycott or the explosion. It had been the slow erosion of trust between them, the constant weighing of self against sacrifice. She pulled Lexi closer. Whatever we decide together. No more fighting alone. The next morning, the town council voted unanimously to reinstate Kenzie at the clinic with full back pay, and to restore Lexi's original position with a public apology letter. They also offered to host the wedding, free of charge, at the same church that had locked its doors. Kenzie looked at the official letter and felt something shift inside her chest. Not forgiveness exactly. Something harder. Something earned. Spring arrived with the scent of new growth and the sound of hammers at the mill as safety upgrades began. Kenzie stood in the pediatric wing watching Tommy Greer run down the hallway on newly healed legs. His mother hugged her without a word. Tears saying everything. Across town, Lexi walked the mill floor again, clipboard in hand, the same workers who had avoided her eyes now nodding respectfully. The change felt fragile, like ice over deep water. They set the new wedding date for June. Small, just family and the few friends who had never wavered. The church doors opened this time. The same pastor who had refused them now stood at the altar looking humbled. When Kenzie and Lexi walked down the aisle together, hands clasped, the pews were filled with faces that had once turned away. Some still looked uncomfortable. Others cried openly. Kenzie felt every stare like a weight she had chosen to carry. After the vows, after the simple reception in the park, they stood alone under the maple tree in their backyard. Lexi slipped the simple gold band onto Kenzie's finger again, this time with no audience. We made it, she whispered. Kenzie kissed her softly, tasting salt from happy tears. We did more than make it. We changed them. But change came with scars. Lexi still woke some nights from nightmares about the explosion. Kenzie still flinched when strangers stared too long. Their families remained fractured. Lexi's father sent a card but never visited. The national attention had faded, yet local gossip lingered in quiet corners. The price of courage was real, and they paid it every day. Years later, when new couples moved to Pinewood and found an openly lesbian doctor and engineer living without fear, they would never know how close the town had come to losing everything. Kenzie and Lexi never regretted their choice. But sometimes late at night they would ask each other in the dark, was it worth it? Was it right for Kenzie and Lexi to help the town that had shunned their love? Or should they have walked away forever? True or false?